listening to The Starting Zone. This is The Starting Zone's live call-in show where we hear questions from you, our patrons. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft for people who play it. Today is March 25th, 2022, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, it's the evening time, so your brain should be up and alert and ready to go.
It's too late now. We missed the window.
There's a window. There's a golden hour.
Like 2-3 good hours in the early afternoon, and that's about it. But yeah. I'll do my best. I'm here. It's been a wild week for WoW stuff, and we're not going to get into all of that in detail on this show because this is the patron episode, and so this is a bonus show that the patrons have made possible, and we're going to talk about some stuff that is related to this week's news, and we're going to talk about some other stuff related to just developments over the last couple weeks of the season. So yeah, I don't know, I didn't think, when we were blocking the calendar out for this week that we'd have like a PTR by the time we were recording March Patron episode, but here we are. So exciting times, I think. I think, we were in that slumber for so long at the end of 9.1, and 9.1.5 had a lot of cool stuff in it, but if you weren't really playing regularly and playing a lot of different characters, you weren't benefiting from it too much. And then 9.2, like the burn was so slow until this past week. And now it feels like it's firing pretty much on all cylinders, and that we have we're missing a couple LFR wings, but we have a relatively complete experience to play now. And it feels great. It feels actually a lot better than I thought that it would. I'm energized a bit because they're just, they're doing the right things. As we're still waiting on a couple features to unlock, or I guess one big feature really, but you can get the stuff that makes you feel cool. You can go get power and power up, and that is what we want out of this game, right? That's what keeps you coming back. So I'm starting to really feel that momentum kick in. Yeah, it's been, for me, it's just been nonstop. Like, I started doing my WoW journals again every week just to keep track of all of the things that I've been doing, to make sure I'm not missing out on something, or, missing whatever it is, or forgetting a nice tip or a fun thing that happened. I'm just writing it all down as it comes in. And so I definitely feel you on, there's just so much more going on right now. And this week definitely kicked that off. I've spent more time sitting and staring at auction house / staring at, raid sims and whatnot of like, where am I going to put my second legendary? What should I craft it on? Which stats should I put on it? How many different ones do I need? I've crafted 4 already. Like, it's a little bit bizarre to sort of like try and figure all that stuff out. This week there's been a lot of thinking and brain power involved in the decisions I've been making. So yeah, it's been a bit crazy. But this episode's not about us, Jason. It's about the patrons, and we have one who's waiting in the waiting room. So I do want to get Corsair Lock in here, if that's good. We'll do that now. All right, Corsair Lock, I see you there. I wanted to get you in here as soon as possible. I know you've been waiting. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well. Are we prepping, or are we live here?
We are live right now.
We're live to hard drive, baby.
Yep.
Welcome, Course. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing this evening? Oh, just vanished. They just vanished.
Oh, no. We lost him.
All right. I think you pressed a button.
From voice. Maybe. Yeah, wrong. Could be.
Well, we will wait and see if he pops back in. We're just going to pause a moment. All right. Well, we'll pop back to Corsair when Corsair gets back. And nope, there he is. All right. Dragging him in. Hey, welcome back.
Happened. I Alt F4 to quit WoW. And
it was on Discord.
Yeah.
I'd do it. All right, welcome back.
Yeah.
So, how you doing?
I'm good, man.
Good.
Yeah. I was so kind of y'all to read that whole question last time and just give a nice and thoughtful response. I've always appreciated your podcast since I learned about it, and I think y'all are just two very thoughtful guys, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you through the podcast.
Well, I appreciate you listening. I'm glad that we've been helpful, and feels like he can get to know us and feels like he can, join in on the Patreon and support us. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And that's what these episodes are all about, is getting into the nitty gritty stuff. So that's why we do them. Now we have a request for you, because for the last year or so here, we haven't been doing these just only taking audience requests. We've been extracting a bit of a toll. We want we want a little temperature check. We're now a month into 9.2. We're a month into season 3, give or take 4 weeks. So we want to hear, how you're feeling. What are you up to, and how's WoW treating you?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's been interesting. Sometimes I hear people kind of a little bit down on the plot. I've really enjoyed the plot. I feel like, we're a year and a half into this, and there's kind of this culmination of a story, and I have an appreciation for RP things, but like, I'm not super totally into it, but it's managed to capture me. When those videos play, you get all emotional. It's just been really nice. And starting to do the Mythic Plus thing again, starting that gear grind, and probably talk a little bit about that here at some point. But I don't know how y'all feel about flying. I feel like walking and riding is something they have to make us do so that we can really appreciate it when we can fly. And we got flying in 9.2. You got it, and then you go up and you fly, and you go look at Ardenwell, and it's just beautiful. And I felt kind of the same way in Zareth Mortis this past week. So anyway, really enjoying it.
Yeah, getting flying in Zareth Mortis was great. It definitely it even kicked off. Well, there's a few things that kicked off me considering playing more than one character. Was flying was one of them. I mean, it going account wide, so your alts can fly there. It having the catch-up mechanics they put in later on the reputation and the storyline. Just a lot of things, especially, now Unity is a legendary. If you have Revered and you've learned that memory, you can then craft that legendary on your alts right away. So they can have 2 legendaries right away. Like, there's a lot of things that are really attractive about that. So yeah, this week really, I think Jason was mentioning at the top of the show, sort of kicked off the feeling of, okay, now the features are kind of fleshed out. Let's get into this content some more. So very cool.
Yeah, I think they've done a really nice job just making all the classes attractive, and there's probably a couple that aren't as much fun, but I think they've just done a good job with the balancing, and that's so hard. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I like what you said about the story too, because I've kind of made it abundantly clear publicly many times over the last 2+ years that Shadowlands is really not hitting me where I live. I don't care for the conceit. The main story hook, and I feel like being transported to this kind of ethereal, these realms of undeath is just weird. It's like it's as bad for me as sort of like the time travel conceit. That said, I've seen a lot of people, especially people who are like not really particularly engaged with World of Warcraft, complaining about the story of 9.2 based on essentially like the Jailer cinematic on YouTube from the Jailer fight. And like that, I agree that I don't think that that's a particularly great, capper to a final raid boss of an expansion, but that is not the story of Shadowlands. And the Zareth Mortis campaign, I think, is actually really good. And the beats that came in this week, they were powerful. I think they did a lot of interesting stuff with some of the storytelling. I think WoW is such a broad game, and they tell the story, the capital S story, in so many different ways, whether it's quests, quest text, flavor items, IGCs, fully rendered cinematics, encounters themselves. There's all kinds of different ways the story is expressed in the game. And not all of it is going to work at the same level at the same time. It's not one completely connected and consistent thing, and a lot of different hands touch it, and it's a group effort, right? And some things have different results than others. I think even for somebody who's kind of disengaged from this particular overarching story, I do appreciate a lot of the stuff that they've done with the beats in Zareth Mortis, and some of the stuff in Sepulchre too. Like I think the Anduin cinematic was good, and the fight tells kind of a cool story. It sort of presents a story to you as you're playing through it with, sort of Anduin like exercising the domination from him and everything like that, like asserting his willpower. It's funny because when they mentioned that the raid was going to be structured that way and that there were like story reasons and blah blah blah, like I think that was kind of a dodge, but I was like, what kind of big moment is this really going to have where it matters? But they actually kind of did make it work that way, because it flows directly into the next week. Anduin's kind of the main character of the campaign and everything like that. So I kind of scoffed at it when it was announced and described, but I think they actually pulled it off pretty well. So I don't know. I mean, it's just like kind of anything else in a game as big as WoW. Like there's going to be good and bad elements to a lot of different parts of it, right? And I think you can have good story beats and you can have interesting character development and you can have just cool plot twists in a broader story that maybe is less interesting. And so I don't know. It's a shame to see it boil down to I didn't like the cinematic, therefore the story is bad. Like that's not really an analysis or any even a critique. It's it's just a complaint basically. But I do think there's something to be said for you want to hit the hardest beats, like the best parts of the story. You want to be flashy in video games, right? Like you don't want it to be subtle. So that, maybe that's part of the problem is that the stuff that's front and center is not, it's not really the goods, and the goods are kind of buried in more of the gameplay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, even when you're just kind of retelling this kind of silly story, even just the retelling of it kind of gives me a little bit of goosebumps, So it's kind of a funny situation.
Cool. I was surprised at how well it actually worked because the whole setup was just kind of ridiculous to me. I didn't even said it on the show. I'm like, what does this really matter? But
yeah,
I think they did a good job of wrapping it all together, even if maybe locking the last 3 bosses was kind of unnecessary the first week. But then again, who was killing, Anduin on their target difficulty the first week? A lot of teams weren't even getting that far because of the balancing. So.
Yeah, it's been a weird thing this raid here, that's for sure. The balancing has been quite the experience, but yeah, as far as the storyline goes, I'm also sort of checked out of story stuff similar to Jason. I enjoy the videos, I enjoy watching some of the story points, but I do feel like if we sit in this expansion long enough, I'll probably go back and actually read a lot more of the text and read into a lot more of the side stories. I was really invested up until the end of Sanctum. And when they sort of made the decisions that they were making with Sylvanas, that was like the final straw for me of the amount of interest I could put into it. And it was just like, all right, I mean, whatever. They're going to do what they do. We're going to move on from this. And we're going to have different story stuff that I get back into again. So unfortunately, because of those story decisions at the end of that raid tier, I really wasn't as open to the Zereth Mortis stuff of what was happening. I can't deny that there's people out there like yourself who really enjoy it, and that's great. For me, I'm very much in a skip through this kind of mentality at the moment because I think I'm just a little bit miffed or a little bit slighted by the decisions they made, and I have to like let that settle for a while and get far enough past it that I can actually appreciate some of the story of the zone. I do find myself curious about some of the creatures and races we're running into, and having not actually paid attention to much of the story, I don't really know what's going on there with some of them. But I think, down the line, I'll probably check in on my second or third character through the stuff. I'll actually take the time to go through it and, pay attention to it and learn it. It's just, it's difficult when you don't agree with the direction that the expansion's gone, story-wise line to continue to put effort into paying attention to what's happening.
Yeah, I think the Sylvanas twist is it's kind of a weird choice. And I think there was that one cinematic where they kind of explained where they did explain why they still needed Sylvanas and why she needed to be kind of a redeemed character. But it is weird that after all years of anguish that she is like the secret to the success. Like it's almost like they're kind of teasing or trolling us a little bit, like, haha, look at what we did to the plot here, and
they sort of painted themselves into a corner, like they made her such a focal point and the main villain of an expansion and a half, basically, but maybe more than that in terms of like the way the timing felt. And so like, I really didn't have any expectation they were going to take a character like that off the board entirely, but you do sort of end up limiting your options because you've invested so much into this character, and she's been the focal point and an antagonist for players for so long, and you're kind of left with something that's inherently kind of anticlimactic. I think what they actually did with the Sylvanas stuff in 9.2 and post Sanctum was kind of smart. Like, it was consistent with the story that had been told, to some degree, with some of the beats around Arthas's victims and the power of domination, the victims of Frostmourne and everything like that. It all, to me, it all kind of lined up okay. Like, I thought it was fine. It would have been a good story had it been compressed and maybe not like the front and center of really Warcraft as a concept for the last, what feels like 4 or 5 years now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, it kind of started at the beginning of Legion, which is almost 6 years old.
Yeah.
And that's where it was really like, Sylvanas hasn't had anything to do since Wrathgate 8 years ago at the time. Right. And so they gave her a little bump at the beginning of Legion, but then it wasn't as pronounced until BFA started ramping up. And that was, that's going on 4 years now. And then it was just all Sylvanas all the time. And it just wasn't sustainable because I don't know. I never really thought that they would take her totally off the board. I think there is some kind of there's some kind of interesting twist where she now has her memories restored and she's like sort of appalled at her own behavior, but realizes that there's no true redemption for her, even though she wasn't really in control entirely of what she was doing. And Sylvanas, Ranger General of Silvermoon, is a different entity essentially than the Banshee Queen. That's a it's a mirror of the Arthas Lich King story, kind of, which she's a creation of Arthas himself, right? Of the Lich King itself. So I think it works okay. I think the problem is when you spend all that time building it up and turning her into a shadier and shadier villain, that it's hard to walk it back and have it be satisfying. And I think that's where they ended up.
Yeah.
Well,
so
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if maybe now might be a good time to kind of talk a little bit about Mythic Plus and kind of my thoughts on that, and then hear your reflections on my reflections on your reflections.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you had a question, so that's perfect.
Yeah, so what I really want out of the game, basically Mythic Plus is my favorite thing. It's relatively low commitment. You get to kind of do the same thing over and over again, but you get to try to do it a little bit better, which it's the sweet spot for me. And what I really liked in BFA is that you could go and do Mythic Plus and you would get, mostly the item level gear that was more or less max level, right? Except for the last two bosses, which really, I feel like the last two bosses in Mythic difficulty, like that's really a prestige thing, and like there should be something extra for that. For all of Mythic difficulty, kind of, at some point I was in an elite guild, and I was on that side of the fence, and I'm not there now, but I do feel like I can relate a little bit. But anyway, I feel like it should be possible to compete in Mythic Plus and really go for that high level IO. Independent of whether or not you're raiding. And there's a few ways that I think that this could be implemented. So just kind of want to run them by you guys and see what you think about them. One idea, assuming you didn't want to encourage people to just go and farm Mythic Plus the first 2 weeks, which I think is a very reasonable concern, right? If we assume that's off the table, you could put a time gate unlocking on rolling out of the higher item levels, right? So the first week, you're basically where you are now, or not the first, but the first few weeks, and then basically over a period of say 2 or 3 months, it ramps up to where you can get the max item level out of the dungeon. And so at that point, the Mythic players are geared; they're not going to be incentivized to go and push a lot of keys necessarily. Trinkets are a weird spot in this. I don't know how to deal with trinkets. Maybe they don't scale, or who knows.
They need to make raid trinkets better than M+ trinkets.
Yeah, that would help. But then I would want to be in a situation where you could still compete in the M+ even without that raid trinket. So it's tricky, right? I know that. Another idea would be that you can still max up your Valor to 272 or 252, but again, it's got to be, I don't know if, to hit 278, you've got to be at the plus 20 level, or, plus 18, or if it's another time gated thing. But I think the Valor system does a lot to help in this, but it doesn't really fully address the problem, if you will. Like, again, I just want to be able to play Mythic Plus competitively without rating. And then another idea that I had is that, this is not that interesting, but it's a solution, is that gear from dungeons drops 13 item levels when you enter a raid, right? So when you queue up for the raid founder, you queue up with plus 13. And when you enter the dungeon, there's some on the fly. It's a lot like the PvP thing that they did a while ago, right?
Yep.
And so to me, that would also be an acceptable solution. And anyway, these are my thoughts.
Sure.
I'm curious what you guys think about these.
Yeah. So I'm someone who's been doing a lot of PvP lately. For those who've been listening to the show, know that I've been sort of doing my maxing my vault and doing a bunch of RBGs, and I started dabbling in arenas this week a bit more, which I'll talk more about on Tuesday. And I personally feel like PvP has got loot figured out. Like, they've really got that sorted in the sense that they have a conquest vendor. You get a certain amount of conquests each week you can earn. You can buy that gear from the conquest vendor, use a different resource, which is honor, to upgrade that gear to a certain item level, which means you're not spending the really valuable currency on upgrades, and you're spending a currency that you can spend as much time farming as you want and farm as much as you want to do those upgrades. So it's really, they're gating you receiving those pieces that can be pushed to high item level, not, the other way around. And they also, with PvP gear, like you mentioned, have the scaling thing of when you turn war mode on, or when you go into a PvP situation, that gear scales up an item level. And I feel like Mythic Plus could take a huge lesson from PvP in this case. Similarly, what you're talking about of having M+ gear scale up when you go into an M+ dungeon, so that when you're put inside that situation, your gear goes up to that 278 or whatever it is item level. But if you wanted to go into raid, or if you're just doing out in the normal world stuff, your gear isn't at that 278 item level point, because it's PvP. It's Mythic Plus based gear. Also, having a vendor that just sells dungeon gear, then you spend Valor to buy items from that vendor. So your PvE raiders can go and run their M+s and go and spend their Valor on a vendor to buy the trinket that they want to buy. And there's another currency, which you can call it whatever you wanted. It can even still be honor. I don't care. You can just earn honor from a whole bunch of different places. And you can spend that currency to upgrade those items. And it's a very similar thing to what they did with PvP. I think that would be very reasonable. And I would even be along the same line of, okay, let's put a currency into the game that is a very slow burn to earn, but you earn from things like callings. You earn from running Mythic Plus and completing them. You earn from, running Battlegrounds and finishing them. That kind of currency that's a very slow burn that lets you buy raid gear. And the raid gear that you buy, will be actual raid gear, but it might take you 4 weeks to earn that one trinket that you really want from raid or whatever it is. But you just earn it over time. I honestly have come to the conclusion after spending a bunch of time PvPing that vendors just solves a lot of these problems. It really does. We've had them in the past. We had them for the longest time early inside WoW's lifespan. And it allows people to have the RNG chance of, hey, I want to get out there and run PvP or do Mythic Plus or do a raid and have a chance at getting this loot to drop for me. And I want to be able to acquire stuff that way through the RNG sort of factory. But at the same time as I am not, I have bad luck protection basically, because I'm running this content and earning a currency that will guarantee me that loot later on. And I think that solves a lot of people's problems with loot acquisition. It's interesting. There's been a bunch of conversations floating around about tier that I've sort of been looking at currently, with a lot of people who are feeling like they don't have their tier set yet, which means that the system is broken and isn't working properly, because they should definitely have their 4 set by what we're like 3 weeks, 4 weeks into raid, right? Like,
no, because that's when they stop playing because they're done, right?
Well,
I mean, you gotta, it's gotta take a minute.
So, even though we have something like the Creation Catalyst coming that'll let you actually generate tier gear in whatever tier slot you want it to be to fill out your sets, and that's going to be something we're going to be cranking tier gear out of. That is a system that for them is too far out, and they should be able to get everything they want in the first couple of weeks. And it feels really bad to not. And I think a certain degree of that is the Creation Catalyst is a system that isn't in the game yet, so we aren't visibly seeing something that we're working towards. We've been told that the first week that we unlock Creation Catalyst, we will be able to upgrade a piece of tier gear. We've been told that, but we don't actually have the machine sitting inside of Zereth Mortis somewhere that we can go and click on and be like, oh, look at that, we're earning currency towards this thing that we're going to be able to do. And I think not physically having it in the game creates this point of frustration. I'm never going to get my tier set, even though we know the system's coming. So I guess my idea to solve a lot of those issues is just adding in vendors that remove the RNG element and allow people to grind towards getting what they want to get, and just time gating how quickly you can purchase items by limiting the amount of currency you can get each week, and making people have to make those important choices of, I really want to get this trinket or this offhand or this weapon or my tier shoulders or whatever it is first. So I'm going to save and save and save so I can actually get that particular piece of gear. And still having the RNG chance of getting it, on the off chance you do, that'd be great. But if you don't, then, you at least you're earning currency towards getting it eventually.
Yeah, and if I may, you said the word time gating,
Sure.
And I think one of the other things that I didn't mention that's important to me personally is that I can pick up in all 2 or 3 months into the expansion, and I can basically catch up. And they've done so much work to improve that situation over the last few years. But for me, this is kind of the critical thing for me personally, and so I really hone in on this.
Yeah. The Valor cap increasing every week and it not being based on when your character was created or when your character was in current content.
Decision.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And a similar thing is happening with Creation Catalyst, where if you create a character and you bring them to Zereth Mortis and we're, 9 weeks into the expansion, you will have a much faster way of acquiring that gear than someone who was there at the very beginning. That system has built-in catch-up as well, cool. Which is great. So they're definitely I guess working on improving those sorts of quality of life and catch up aspects of the game, which I've always been happy for. I mean, I play the game very actively, so I very rarely take advantage of these systems, but I've never really seen a problem in having them. The only thing that I really feel like is sacred, I guess, is having some sort of reward, the I was there reward that players can earn of, I actually put in the time during this limited window of time and achieve something cosmetic that's flashy for my character because I actually was playing the game during this window. That to me is always important to have in the game. But character power should just be something that, over time gets easier and easier. If you join in the last 2 months of an expansion, you should be able to catch right up with your friends, pretty much in a couple of weeks, right? It shouldn't be something where you're struggling for months to try and get on the same level as they are as far as gear and progression goes with story and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a lot of stuff here, but there's a couple things that stand out to me that, I've mentioned publicly a few times that I think that, it's been a mistake to move away from badges, right? From boss drops and PvE content, and having some type of badge vendor to fill in the gaps or whatever. I mean, we've seen it in the past where you could buy set pieces from, certain drops that you knew you could get this many drops in a certain amount of time and you could get them, right? Also having like raid reps. I know rep grinding is not everybody's favorite thing to do, but it's kind of cool to have stuff seeded specifically for raiders that they can acquire if they participate in the raid approximately for this long, right? That's basically built-in streak protection. I mean, over the summer and into starting in the summer and all the way through the end of the year, I was kind of telling the horror story on the show of like, my guild not being able to rip heroic Sylvanas bows and not being able to rip heroic Sylvanas Dom socket pieces. And, in many cases, we never got them and just moved on. And we were just using lower item level loot than what we really earned from playing the game at that level for so long. And I don't think that should just the only option should not be, well, just kill it every week forever and maybe it drops, and if it doesn't, maybe you get out of your vault, and if you don't, then you don't have it. Come back next week. Like that's just not a good spot for loot to be. I think some things with loot distribution feel fundamentally broken right now because you have tokens back, but the trading rules are very restrictive. You don't have master loot. The Great Vault is designed to sort of give you a nudge into getting your tier pieces regardless of how you play, except that means that we have the expectation that we're going to see them as choices in there until we get what we need. And it sort of serves the same purpose as a vendor, except it's not foolproof. Somebody in my guild this week had 4 options in his vault, and all of them were cloaks. That is not a good situation for your big weekly reward that you spend all week trying to fill up and earn. That should not be possible, in my opinion. And having a vendor, and they've said many times in the past that they don't want it to be like, okay, players have this checklist and they just check off all these tasks every week, and then they know, like, okay, week 4 I buy this, and week 7 I buy this, and because they want to have moments of excitement, they want the game to have those spiky moments, but like, why not have both? I don't understand the hesitancy on some of these things when it's just there's been so many feels bads over the last few years as they've pulled back on this stuff. I don't really think that they should draw a sharp distinction between PvE gear, to be honest. Like I think that what they should do is make gear accessible. Make it something you can target and you can go get. I do think doing Mythic Plus at the high end is probably more challenging and punishing than doing like heroic level rating and maybe a cup of coffee Mythic bosses, as long as you have people to play with. I mean, obviously the logistical challenge of raids is the highest of all because you have so many moving pieces. But, in terms of being taxed, like heroic rating is pretty taxing, but high-end Mythic Plus is extremely taxing. And it's a small group, so you don't have any room for error. You can't really stash somebody who's maybe having a bad night or just isn't optimal or whatever. Yeah. But your character, for a long time, the philosophy was your character is your character, and we've seen the pendulum swing between PvE and PvP and PvE gear are totally separate. To there is no distinction between this gear. To there is no gear in PvP, and everything is templated. To now we have like separate gear, but it's not unusable in either situation. And you want like a smattering of stuff, maybe depending on, from different types of content. I think like that direction is okay. It's just about the accessibility factor. Like you should be able to, raid LFR and normal and save up currency to make sure that you can get this trinket that you want to PvP with or something. Every once in a while there's some weird absorb trinket or something that's really good in PvP. Yeah. Well, instead of being at the mercy of just RNG drops on that boss, make it something people can work towards. It's an accomplishment for them. They get the reward, and I like that idea better, I think. It's just the one thing I'll say about dungeon loot is I when the Valor system came in 9.0.5, I was not impressed. I was expecting Valor as in I complete tasks, I receive Valor, I save up Valor, Valor turns directly into gear. Mm-hmm. And that's not what it was. And I didn't like the implementation of it within the .5 patch, right? Because, and this was not really their fault from a tech standpoint. They stood the tech up as soon as they could. Design didn't really get out in front of it in time, I guess. But the good thing is, I think, like as you saw with the Season 2 roll and as you see with this roll, the Valor system is really good. Having to earn a set amount of rating to be able to then spend acquired currency that you can only cap so much a week, but you can catch all the way up if you missed prior weeks. Yeah. And, then you can get to a very respectively high item level on any piece that you acquire through the system, as long as you put the effort and time in. That's great. I would actually, the only thing I would tweak with Valor would be to when a season rolls, put another, X amount of ranks on existing gear. Don't make me reacquire a blood spattered scale. If it's going to be the trinket that I want every season, don't make me reacquire it. I have one. I need to earn the new rating in order to unlock the higher item levels, and then I need to earn and spend the valor in order to be able to power it up to the new rank 12. So I feel like that would be that seems like something that they're just I don't know if that's technologically capable. Like if they could just tack all that stuff onto existing item IDs, it may not be. But how about some kind of system where I could then trade my existing season 2 item for a season 3 item at a vendor of equivalent item level, and then that has that progression path. Like, I think that would be
trinkets, right?
Yeah, because you want the same ones over and over again.
But trinkets, they're really, you got to get lucky. And you hear horror stories of our friends that do 40 clears and they just don't get it. It's like, okay.
Yeah, and there's no other option. You're not getting it in any other way. So I would love to see that kind of barrier go away. Like, you have this piece, it's yours for the duration of this expansion, and if you put the work in, you can power it up alongside you. Like, that feels so good in this game. It felt good going back to like Missa Pandaria Valor upgrades on gear. I would cap out my Valor every week and get the +6 item levels or whatever it was at the time, 4 out of 4 on my entire gear set, even though I wasn't doing any new content. There was nothing coming down the pike, but it was just fun to do, and it felt good to get that little bump, over and over again. So, I don't know. I can't see him really doing that, but I think it would be a huge boon to the system because it would just empower players to have more fun with the dungeon system. Just go do whatever dungeons you want. Go do whatever dungeons you need for raiding or whatever. You don't have to sit in one particular dungeon over and over again, just spamming 7s or whatever, trying to get a drop so you can power it up.
You know where that does help though is, and they've done something on this where they're trying to make it easier for elite players to have a reason to come down and help out with the set.
Yeah, that's true.
And that helps, but maybe there's other ways of doing it too.
Right, just provide more bonus valor or something, or I don't know. Have they kind of have that guide program in place? Maybe expand on that kind of idea or something. Yeah, I think there's other options there. I think that is a good knock-on effect of the way the system works, that you have to reacquire every season. But I think a bigger benefit would just be to make people happy, and you get an item and then you have it. That item's going to cycle out someday because it's either going to get nerfed or the expansion's going to end. So
it would make the patches feel less artificial too.
It's just like it's a bit. I mean, I think this patch 9.2 really suffered from that. The first couple of weeks it was this huge reset. We lost all of our power, and we're staring at this mountain to climb to get that next 30 item levels or what have you. It was like almost an expansion level drop off in the middle of an expansion, and the reacquisition I think really amplifies that a bit. It would be really awesome if you could just take a piece forward and then redo all of your rating and valor.
I thought of another while you guys were chatting. I thought of another immediate solution they could put in to sort of help out Mythic Plus players, and that is how they recently put in the ability to socket gear by getting 6 tokens from your vault, spending it to put a socket in, get the socketable thing inside the pieces that can actually get sockets, putting an item in that you could spend 6 tokens on that would take a 272 piece and allow it to go to 278. So you can actually get those 6 extra item levels. So if you had a trinket that you'd fully upgraded with Valor, let's say you've done your 2,500 ratings, so you've actually done the big achievement for Mythic Plus, you've gotten your 2,500 rating. Now you've unlocked the ability to also buy an item that when you apply it to a piece of gear, takes it from 272 to 278 and sets it to 278. I think would be another immediate solution for those M Plus players who are looking to get consistently that 278 gear that Mythic Raiders currently are able to get. And, PvPers who are able to earn that gear just through doing rating and getting their rating higher can then go upgrade it. It sort of solves the problem for the M Plus scene and also helps out the Raider people like myself who want to have a 278 IQD and, have to wait for a random roll from the vault because it's the only way I can get one. So this would allow me to go, okay, it gives you other options for someone who gets 4 cloaks in their vault that week, right? Taking those 6 tokens and spending them on a socket, eventually you've socketed everything, and what are you going to spend the tokens on? I think it gives you one more thing to choose to, hey, if I choose to spend this on turning a 272 into a 278, that's also a very attractive thing to do with the tokens. So yeah, if that was a possible thing to do, that would be that'd be on my list for this patch or next patch.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice thing for the people that for the characters that start early on and can actually they're sitting in that 246 or 272, and there's really nothing for them in the vault. Kind of about halfway, 2/3 through the season. That would be being unable to get that 252 IQD, man, that's rough. If you're competitive, that's a rough situation in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of burst that you're not getting. So yeah,
and there's just no path. Yeah, I mean, I think there's been fits and starts. There's been some growing pains, but I think they have moved in a good direction over the course of this expansion. You know, I think if they carry some of this stuff directly forward and continue to iterate on it and improve on it, they will be in a really good spot next expansion. What I hope is that, you know, we kind of have this cycle in this game a lot where an expansion comes out and it's got cool stuff, but it's rough around the edges and there's problems with the systems at baseline levels. And then they fix it and they add quality of life and they tweak it and they make other cool additions and they add catch-up mechanics. And then they throw the baby out with the bathwater when the next expansion comes out. You know, I think of like Legion, for example. Legion is obviously beloved. It's my favorite era of the game ever. And it had a lot of great ideas, but it did, you know, obviously it did have some stuff that rubbed people the wrong way. And I think, like, particularly the legendary system is something that they missed the mark on at the beginning. They adjusted and made better and better and better, and then they didn't learn the correct lessons from it, and just it didn't appear in BFA. And then the implementation of legendaries in Shadowlands is a completely different, weird, and problem-fraught thing. And it, you know, it seems like I know they need to do things differently each time out. They have to have some variety. They have to keep it fresh. And, you know, you're not going to hit all home runs. And I respect the process. But I feel like sometimes they're in recent history, they've been too beholden to like the wrong lessons of the past. And they just seem a bit stubborn to meet players where they actually are. But I think, you know, the last 5 months or so has shown that a real willingness to turn a lot of that stuff around. I mean, you look at 9.1.5 into 9.2 and into obviously what we know is coming in 9.2.5 with cross-faction instances and stuff. It's like, it's starting to wake up. So I just, you know, I feel optimistic about what's coming down the road. It's just, there's been a lot of growing pains with, you know, reward tiers and currencies and stuff in this expansion in particular. So hopefully they smooth all that out and learn the correct lessons from it when we roll into the next expansion.
Yeah. Well put.
Well, Corsair, you got anything else for us, or are you all set?
You know, I appreciate it. You know, I think we've given the designers a lot to think about. And
I'm sure they'll be contacting us for further insights. Yeah.
But anyway, this has been great. I appreciate you guys. And, you know, catch you sometime again later.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. Feel free to do so again. Always good to chat. So thanks again.
Of course, thanks for supporting the show, man. And thanks for calling in.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Night, guys.
Night. All right. With that, let's move on to one of our first write-ins. And the write-ins sort of tie right into what Jason sort of had mentioned there briefly, which is this one comes in from Robert. It says, would be really interested to hear you guys discuss the proposed season 4 that's planned for later this year and what you think about it. Thanks. Okay. So yes, potentially stuff coming in season 4. We got a post this past week. We aren't going to talk about it super in depth. But basically it's another season where they're going to make all of the raids relevant that are currently in this expansion. So the 3 raids from this expansion will be relevant. They're going to add like affixes, like Mythic Plus style affixes to them. They're going to scale up all the item levels on the gear that drops. They're going to have another Mythic Plus season. That Mythic Plus season is going to include the previous mega dungeons in Karazhan and Mechagon, as well as 2 dungeons from Warlords of Draenor, which people are voting on right now. So that's what we know so far. Obviously, there's more stuff planned for the April announcement that we're going to get. But as far as what we know so far, okay. So season 4, I have ultra mixed feelings about this, and I have to preface all of this by just saying we're going to get it. There's no changing their minds. It's going to happen. So at a certain point, you need to just accept that part of it, that aspect of it, and move forward. Because for me, I feel like if we were going to be sitting in season 3 for the next year and a half anyways, so like till next July, let's say anyways, and by next I mean a year from this coming, the 2023 July, if we're going to be sitting in this current season 3 until then, no matter what, then season 4 sounds great because it's going to be something that spices things up. So that's great. But if not having them spend time revamping, doing all this work to create a season 4 meant that we were going to be moving into next expansion in like February of next year or March, I think I probably would have not had season 4 personally. That's just me, just where I'm at. I'm someone who, I guess we'll dig into the part of what I think about season 4 now. I'm someone who likes to feel like I'm really participating in current content. I don't know what this is going to be like for raid teams, because as much as Blizzard has sort of made it known that they don't want this to be like a competitive thing where teams are like racing to redo content or whatever, it's going to happen. There's going to be people who are pushing to get world ranks on who can clear what first with different affixes and all that kind of stuff. That aspect's going to happen.
Dude, they did world first Ragnaros a couple years ago when they opened up classic servers. Like, the players are going to compete, whether you tell them to or give them a reason to or not. It's going to happen.
Yeah, so by basically saying, hey, we're going to have 3 raids all relevant at the same time, all with the same item level gear that are content that we've already done, it means that we're reprogging some of these bosses that I really dislike doing with an affix that's going to make them harder. It also means that for you to sort of feel like you're wearing your best gear or you're optimizing your class. I mean, people right now who are complaining about not having their 4 set, I mean, picture when you're trying to do math calculations around DOM sockets and tier pieces and trinkets that come from this raid versus that raid. And there's a lot of gear. Like, there's a lot of gear and a lot of systems and a lot of power systems based out of that. So, I have my concerns. I am very, very much on the fence as to if this is a good thing or a bad thing that they're doing. That's just me. Everyone out there is entitled to entirely their own thought process. I know there's lots of people who are super excited. For me, it just felt very overwhelming. And every time I start looking at it a little closer to sort of see what it is or see what people are speculating, it gets feeling overwhelming again because there's going to be just so much in it that is.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just we don't have a lot of details, right? So I think it's especially for somebody who approaches the game the way you do, it's kind of natural to be kind of trepidatious because we don't have concrete details.
Sure.
To me, it seems like it is not. When we talk about timelines and timing of new content and season 4 roll, I don't think that we are sacrificing time that we could be playing expansion 9 in order to squeeze season 4 in. I can't imagine that the producers on the game and John Haidt sat down and went, guys, we got to do a 4th season. So we got to adjust timelines because we got to give season 4 some room to breathe.
Oh, I don't think it's about, and I want to clarify, it's not about giving it room to breathe. It's about, hey, we aren't going to be ready by this date, right? July of 2023. We wanted to release it in February. It's not going to be ready. We need to give them something so we aren't sitting in current state for that long.
I mean, this is what I'm saying. It doesn't. This, to me, season 4 roll doesn't indicate anything really about X9 development because that's on its own timeline and that's going to be its own thing. And season 4 roll in 925 is going to be small potatoes compared to that, especially without any new content to make sure it actually functions. So it's basically it's not really. There's no. It's not like it was a choice for Team 2 between earlier X9 or Season 4. It was X9 is here, and we can maybe make the tail end of Shadowlands cooler than we've done with previous expansions.
Yeah, if that was the situation, then I'm better with Season 4.
Yeah, there's no way it could be anything else because why else would they sacrifice resources on an expansion that has seen the player base evaporate, that has not been a critical success, and it hasn't retained people. The patches haven't really even moved the needle in terms of subs and engagement. It doesn't make sense from a business standpoint. So, X9 is what it is. It's when it's going to be whenever it's going to be, and that's how the production schedule, I think, must have slotted this in. How else would you do it? You have to assess like what you know and what you think and go from there. So I'm glad they're trying something wacky. I feel like they never try any wacky stuff in live WoW, like maybe once in a while, but they always have to tamp down the wackiness. Like corruption was pretty wacky in 8.3, but it took forever for it to actually become wacky because it was only like a little bit of corruption resistance, and you got to do a lot of work to get a little bit more every week, and then you got to do a ton of work to get the gear you actually want that has the corruption you want on it, and then it gets really wacky. I guess my hope is in season 4 that they just open up that much more in terms of character power, itemization. Let me slot in another legendary or something. Let's just use all the existing systems that we have in season 3 now, where it's easy to make a high rank legendary. It's easy to get higher item level gear and to boost it up. Just keep that rolling. I mean, I think a lot of how interesting it ultimately is going to be is going to depend somewhat on how much they re-itemize the raids. I mean, they mentioned that the raids are all going to be relevant item level, right?
Yep.
So you can imagine plus 26 item levels per difficulty would be my thought. If that's all they do, then it seems kind of pointless because, for one thing, Nathri is really not going to be. There's not going to be much of a reason to go there.
Yep. There'll be trinkets. That's it. It'll be trinkets.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to weigh them against each other, I guess. But yeah, like Nathri's loot really wasn't good, and that was one of the big problems with this expansion early on, was that the raid loot table was so underwhelming. I mean, is the door open for new set bonuses? Is the door open for some kind of re-implementation of domination sockets and something like that? Maybe consumable ones, or combine some kind of combination of like the dom socket idea with set pieces.
I can tell you, there's a lot of people right now who destroyed their dom socket gear or got rid of their dom socket like gems after we moved into this patch, who'd be very upset if suddenly you can start using them again.
Yeah, but there's no way they will let you use them again. It would be the same idea, but you'd have to go through if they make you reacquire blood spattered scale every season, they're going to make you get new dom sockets and new dom shards and whatever.
Maybe, man, I don't know.
But they could do it better, is my point. Like they can have it be a more streamlined process, like an easier funnel to get people into the stuff that they need and power it up. They could actually learn from the lessons of season 2 and from season 3 so far, and do some cool stuff and not just bump everything plus 26 and call it a day. I would love to see something like that. Mix it up, bring in new bonuses. Let me wear 2 legendaries plus Unity. And I think I think it's better than nothing, right? Like no matter what, I mean, we've been saying for a long time that we're going to be in season 3 for a long time, right? If this means we're in a slightly shorter season 3 and season 4 has, I'm a little concerned about the Mythic Plus dungeon pool. I'm not going to lie, but that said, like season 4 is going to mix it up a lot. We know that there's like a little bit of new content coming in 925 already that's been data mined, just some new stuff to go do, stuff to go chase, cosmetics and stuff like that. That's great. I think it'll soften the blow to some degree. The other thing that I think about is the vault. How does a great vault work if you have 3 different raids?
Oh man, the pool in that is going to be insane.
Right. Like, do you get a choice from each raid instance? Do you get choices only based on stuff that you've killed for the week? Do you have to focus on one instance? And like, is it going to be, okay, everybody just only do Sepulcher until your raid team has basically everything they want out of Sepulcher, and then you will only get Sepulcher loot, and then you can get your 4 set bonuses and your other key items out of there, and then you can do Sanctum of Domination for other pieces to fill in, and then maybe add Nathri in if you need those. I mean, this is why I think there needs to be more than just the item level bump, right? In order for it to be interesting and even sort of viable. Like maybe vendors are a solution in this regard too. Maybe just more of like more structure to the vault with like more options. Maybe you could take more than one item from the vault. Like maybe you can do, if you've killed this many Nathria bosses, you can pick a Nathria item. And if you've killed this many Sanctum bosses, you could pick a Sanctum item. And if you've killed this many Sepulcher bosses, you could pick a Sepulcher item. Like, I don't think that's out of balance for something like this. And I hope they just go really wacky with it. It would be my preference. Let's really spice it up. Like, we always get to the end of expansion. It's sort of like the end of Legion, where it's like, okay, we have double legendary. We have our artifact powers exploding, and Concordance is getting out of control, and everything feels really ridiculous. The stuff is just evaporating, but it's like this 2-week haha window before the expansion comes out. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do this for longer? And like that's what I really want this to be. I want it to be the wouldn't it be cool if season. So we don't have enough details to know if that's even realistic at this point, but the only thing I will say is please stop voting for Grim Rail Depot for Mythic Plus. We do not want Grim Rail Depot in the Mythic Plus pool.
I just want Blood Maul Slag Mines, man. That's what I want. Slag Mines in there as one of the M pluses. Like that's
Slag
whatever
Mines
the other one is.
Yeah.
If it happens to be Grim Rail, there's going to be people who are upset about Grim Rail. I'm excited to see MDI Grim Rail. That's like the reason why it's motivating for me.
Make them do it. Don't make me do it.
That's fair. All right, but Slag Mines to me is
it
fantastic.
has no hope. It has no hope in the poll, but it has so much potential for
such
a
good Keystone dungeon potentially. Yeah. I hear what you're saying about season 4 stuff, and I agree that I think it's just early to make full judgments. For me, it was just my gut reaction when hearing the news was, oh, this means that we're looking at like July or August 2023 for the next expansion.
I don't think that's what it means on its face. It might mean that, but you know what? It meant that anyway. Right, so you might have just been getting nothing.
Well, and that's exactly right. That's where I was saying there's the trade-off of if it meant that I might have just been getting nothing. At least this is something for people to be doing and staying interested and checking out and whatnot.
That's absolutely what. Yeah, that's the only way to look at it. There's no other way for it to be looked at because there's no circumstance. They're going to get X9 in your hands and they're going to get your money out of your wallet as soon as they humanly can. Yeah. That is their job.
Yeah, and the business perspective is definitely there of speaking some rationalization on my fears. But when it comes to other stuff with season 4, and this sort of ties a little bit into some of the questions other people have been asking as to like what do we want really in season 4? Like what would be the ideal stuff? And you touched on a lot of things as far as vendors and easier acquisition and. Our earlier conversation touched on things like, better vault systems for guaranteeing gear. I have a lot of problems with tier gear at the moment and its acquisition, not as far as how quickly people can acquire it, but more so of like seeing the split runs that are happening with some of these mythic teams and that being a thing, and then seeing how PvP tier gear works right now is really dumb. And how that system works, and by dumb I just mean it's incredibly RNG based. Basically, the only way, and this is the number one thing to factor in when you're thinking about PvP and tier gear, is all of the PvP tier pieces can only be acquired through the vault. And you might be like, oh, but you can totally like get tier gear from any of the things. No, you can't get PvP tier from any of those things. PvP tier gear scales with item level when you enter PvP combat, which means your PvP tier gear actually goes up to 285 eye level. That's actually where it goes. And that's incredibly important to recognize when it comes to the difference between someone random rolling tier gear out of their vault for the first 3 weeks inside a PvP situation and having 30 to 40 item levels on the person who got their tier gear from a different source is a pretty insane difference right now. So yeah, that to me would need to get addressed too. So there's a lot of things in season 4 I'd like to see change and happen. I think the biggest thing is I would want, as Jason's been describing, it to be more of a playground. We're getting cross-faction content. That's coming in season 4. We're getting this bizarro 3 active raids at the same time, everything the same viable item level. We're getting a massively increased Mythic Plus pool. I would, love to see them just really swing for the fences as far as doing crazy things. Like, let's get, a profession revamp in there. Let's get like anything that's been sitting on that what if board for a while. Let's just start pulling ideas off that and throwing it into season 4, because this is the live brawl, if you will, patch. This is going to be the brawl patch of World of Warcraft, where they can do anything they want, right? Yeah.
Like, what can we move around with minimal new assets, right?
Exactly.
Like, we don't have new content, we have new maps, we don't have new props, we don't have new dialogue, but what else can we change?
Yeah, we'll just get some interesting ideas into the hands of millions of players that have been on the chalkboard for a while, and see what people think, and then just tweak them as you go. Like, they've been so active in changing things right now in the current game that I would be hopeful that they could continue that in something like the next patch. So yeah, I don't know. I
seems like it'd be the perfect venue for it, right? Like,
yeah.
Especially when the announcement is Randy telling you that they're not planning like competitive rewards for it or anything, right? Like, in other words, Hall of Fame type stuff, titles, etc. Like, before they're telling you anything else about it, they're telling you like, listen, it's not going to be like that. So, with that expectation set, like, let's just go over the top. Give me 3 legendaries and consumable Dom sockets on my new set bonuses. Like, let's do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Robert, for that. And let's go from looking forward to looking back. We have a question here from Johnny Trask, who says, I'd be interested in an expansion review. Top things you like, top things you disliked, maybe a wish list for next expansion, points to sustain, points to improve. Okay. So I don't want to do like a full, like expanded giant review. That's like a 3-hour thing where I invite a guest on to talk about it.
We'll have Ted on, and we'll save that for right before the next expansion.
Yeah. But
then we'll probably need therapy. We'll need a therapy session after that.
No, yeah. Well, we could make it a 3-part series where we have 3 4-hour episodes, like sort of thing, inviting guests on.
Everybody's just telling
we'll
their
have all
story.
This time. We'll have all this time to do that in the next year.
Everybody else is just nodding along in solidarity as somebody's like, and then this happened, and I couldn't get this thing, and this didn't work right. There's been so much time in Torghast.
The Torghast grind alone is like 4 episodes for. Right, bring on the right people. They will talk about Torghast forever. But yeah, I'm happy to go through some of the top of my mind finer points for this expansion, and I want to highlight.
I'll try to do like three big wins and 3 things that we didn't like or that didn't work.
And I'm going to take lore off the table because the end of this quest chain comes out next week, and so I can't really fully, because I feel like I'm just going to crap on the storyline for this expansion. And they could do something absolutely amazing on Tuesday. And I would be like, well, now I feel like a total goof for doing this.
You log in on Tuesday, Sylvanas just dies, and you're like, I feel so much better now.
Exactly.
I thought you were going to take lore off the table because his last day at Blizzard was yesterday.
Well, there was that too. Yeah, Josh is a great guy, moving on to something incredible. So glad he's getting a different opportunity to do something new. He's been in that job for a long time. But yeah, we'll give him a bigger shout out on Tuesday for sure. Okay, so let's see here. Top things I really liked about this expansion. I really liked covenants. I think they were a great system. I think the barriers to them were too harsh. I think where covenants are right now is actually a pretty good place to a certain degree. But I loved the in-depth storytelling aspect of it. I really loved class halls inside Legion, and the fact that covenants really touch home in the same area as those did made me really excited and really enjoyed them. I liked the events. I liked the garden. I liked the thing where you can have the arena fight over in Kyrian, and you can have the soiree doing that event for Venthyr, and building your own A-bomb for Necrolord. I think are all great. I think they're great systems having those. The Covenants in general to me were a really big hit. It's a great storytelling delivery system. There was really interesting dynamic stories happening in each of them. You got attached to the characters, you quested with the characters, you progressed along with those characters and the storylines. So I loved the Covenants as one of my tops. And I would tie another top into that, which is the art. The art in this expansion has been phenomenal. Even though it's not Azeroth, it's still just, there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not hanging out in Ardenweald at some point going, man, this looks good. Like, it just breathes life into me when I'm in those spaces. It's such a nice aesthetic. Like, you just hanging out in them just feels right. Like, not wanting to log out of the game because it's just you feel more at home when you're around inside that aesthetic and around those aesthetics. So they really knocked that out of the park. That's probably my second win for this expansion, was how well they did the art. I mean, even the Maw, when you can criticize a lot of the negatives of its sort of like all grayscale and all that, it felt hostile. It felt like you're on an asteroid. It felt like you were in an aggressive environment. Like, they still nailed it. It shouldn't be a comfortable place to be, and a place you want to be. That's what they were aiming for. So they still hit the nail on the head when it came to art for that space. So you can't really deny that. So yeah, I think the art is probably my second win after Covenant Systems. And then I think probably last for my wins is the raid content. This tier, I like this expansion. I think the raids have been really strong. I think they've had a lot of really dynamic, interesting encounters. There's been, I think, maybe 3 fights that sort of stand out in my mind that were like, ugh, kind of encounters to sort of deal with. But there were very few compared to like BFA and previous expansions where you had I always think of Drestagath. Like, Drestagath was just like a terrible encounter to clear on a regular basis. And for me, being able to have the farm and the farm be enjoyable is so important. And I never found that the farm to me became really sloggy in this expansion. Like, became to the point where I was like, oh my God, just get me out of this boss fight. This is just, oh, we have to go through this thing again. It's going to be waiting for, I think the only fight that did that was Sylvanas. And it's just because it was a really long fight, which was just its own problem. So yeah, I think the raid encounters themselves were really well done, and I really enjoyed those. So those are probably my 3 wins. The negatives, I think that a lot of the systems in the game were designed, and I've talked about this on the show before, around the fact that, well, actually, here, I'll let Jason go first. Jason, you do your positives first. We'll do all the positives, and we'll do our 3 negatives.
I think, yeah. And then when listening at home, you can do it the other way around, so that you end on a high note.
Well, we'll end on a high note no matter what. I got a high note thing to end on. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, for me, I think, probably I think the biggest win overall actually is the Valor system and the Mythic Plus rating system. I think it's a huge advancement for Mythic Plus as a content type overall, and the idea of something codified in the game that you do, and that it unlocks functionality that powers you up alongside the level of the content that you're doing. It's worked out really well. It was awkward coming in a .5 patch, but with the season rolls, it's been really strong. It's something that I hope they just pick it up and plop it down in X9, and just continue to iterate on it and make improvements to it. It's exactly what Mythic Plus loot needed in a lot of ways. There's still the conversation about acquisition, of course, but they're obviously they're gonna give you loot as they see fit. I think the other big win for me was not really the Covenant system, because I have some gripes with the Covenant system overall. It wasn't my favorite implementation for like the main gimmick that you're doing out on your own. But the thing about it that was awesome was Renown. Renown is a great innovation for how to sort of portion content out to keep players engaged in a particular story or a particular activity, and give them rewards along the way. And the community of players, everybody in a guild, everybody on a server, whatever, is experiencing content like around the same time if they're caught up, if they're on that cutting edge. And then when you come back through in an alt, or when somebody joins the expansion late, they can catch all the way up. They can see everything in sequence. They get all this stuff unlocked. Granted, they were a little cagey with Renown catch up early on, but now it's like, we'll talk more about it on Tuesday probably, but I've been playing some alts this week, because you get Unity for free now if you just do some quests. So I've been doing some quests, and if you, between the item that gives you Renown 40 plus just doing the new campaign, you pretty much get to 80. You don't even really have to think about it. So I think Renown could be a real model going forward. And I think I talked about this either on the show or to somebody in the Discord recently or something. I really feel like it's the model for feature unlocks going forward should be tied to a Renown type system, right? Like, you could essentially it's the same thing as a quest campaign, in which in this case unlocks like flying and unity in Eternity's End. That stuff could have just been renown ranks, technically, right? It's like you get the renown from completing the campaign quest, and you could use maybe some of those UI elements, throw in some other little cosmetic rewards or something, just make it feel cool, make it feel epic to earn it. Make it a bigger deal, call it out more in the UI. But instead of having it tied to a rep bar, and you have to log in every week and do this activity, the same set of activities for sure. You have to do that. And then if you want to, you need to log in every day. And if you spend X amount of time, you get this reliable amount of rep. And then if you spend way more time, you get a smaller, more unreliable amount of rep. And you repeat that until you get to the threshold you want, and then you get the feature you want. I think that's outdated. I don't think that works for the modern game or the modern player base. I think renown, and I have not really heard many complaints from people I play with, friends of mine, TSZ listeners, about renown. Renown seems to be the thing that everybody sort of can there's the Shadowlands is a controversial expansion, but I don't think renown really rubbed anybody the wrong way. There was some weirdness in the beginning because you had to do things in a certain order in order for dominoes to fall for renown ranks to unlock, but where they ended up with it is great. So I think that's, those are the two things I think that should absolutely be blueprints for the future of the game is Mythic Plus rating system and the Valor upgrades and renown. And yeah, I mean, the other highlight for me, I mean, it's no surprise is the raid content. I think the raids have been great, even though I do think they have a tendency to overcomplicate raids and overdesign raids. I think they are making stuff that's a little bit like bigger and more epic, and in terms of scope, in terms of scale, than players really necessarily want or need to feel like they're doing something cool. I think the Sylvanas fight is a big example of like that ethos just gone totally out of control. But that's a real outlier. I feel like most of the bosses are accessible and fun. They've done really cool stuff in this expansion with like environments and arenas that you fight bosses in, adding layers of like interactivity to bosses that we maybe didn't have in years past. So, even months deep into Sanctum and even with the frustration of the loot drops or lack thereof, I was having a good time with that raid. I mean, the Sylvanas fight, yeah, you're never really looking forward to that fight that is going to be like 11 minutes if everything goes perfectly.
Dude, that's a fast kill. When that fight first came out, it was 14 and a half. That was what those kills were.
I think I think our average kill was probably about, like 12 and a half, 13 minutes on heroic. So like that's definitely a thing in the back of your mind all night or all raid week, right? Like, oh, we got to do that again. But I think they've done so much cool stuff in this expansion with raid encounters, and they kind of have to, right? They've hung their hat on raiding is like the thing that they have for you to do when you've played all the one-time content. Obviously PvP is its own beast, but for PvE content, it's raiding. Like Mythic Plus is definitely an injection of interest into dungeons, and it does keep it super fresh because of the rotation. But raids are really like they're the signature piece of endgame content that they create, and I think it's sort of a testament to how good their encounters team has been over the years, because the raids are always one of the best things about every expansion. And this one isn't any different for me so far. I haven't seen every single fight yet. I haven't seen the last two, but I don't know. I think Sepulchre is a lot better than I was maybe afraid it was going to be or something, or they did kind of miss the mark with the tuning the first week or two, and it felt really weird. And also the power cliff we fell off felt weird. But after a couple more weeks in there, I'm enjoying the progression through Sepulchre, and I think it's really well done. So, I think for me, two kind of new things, experiments or iterations on stuff we had before, and then the old reliable raid content.
Yeah, cool. As far as something that rubbed me the wrong way this expansion, and that's what I was sort of starting into was. I mentioned this before on the show, that I feel like a lot of the content for Shadowlands was designed with a particular timeline in mind, and that timeline got blown up partway along the way. And a great example of this for me is the Maw, and the restriction of how much time you can spend in the Maw with the eye. that was tracking you, and it would get more hostile over time. Really cool concept. Really interesting for about a month, and then it needed to go away. And they had all these plans to have it go away, but it took like 4.5, 5 months for it to go away, because that's how long it took for the next chunk of content to come out. And so it felt like the designers, when they were planning these things, weren't I either didn't recognize how bad it would feel when it's going to be out for that long period of time, or planned it with a different timeline in mind, and then that wasn't the timeline they were able to deliver it on. That felt like was a consistent theme through this entire expansion for me, is systems coming out and being in place that didn't feel really good after the first 5 or 6 weeks or 2 months of it being out, but the next step, which is supposed to solve this thing, is 6 months away, and you're like, oh my god, like, just give me that next step sooner. Everything should happen sooner, and then it feels good. It's one of those cases of like, if someone wrote an entire book in its entirety, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to give you the first 10 pages, and don't worry, next week I'm giving you the next 10, and then next week becomes 3 months from then, right? And it's that kind of feeling of like, no, just give me, you put the book together in a great way. It's a great book. Just give me the whole book, right? And not being able to deliver on that was really important. So that to me was a negative thing about this expansion for sure. And hopefully going forward, it feels more like there's natural stopping points in between these sections of content that we get, and it's less like we're waiting for the next thing because it's going to actually help us enjoy the game more than where we're currently at right now. Like I like when patches actually feel like a complete sort of sphere of content that you can live in, and it changes as you progress through it, and it isn't leaving players in the lurch in a bad spot like Shadowlands did a lot of the time. That's sort of my first thing. My second thing is I guess I just have to highlight the amount of changes that were required after player feedback happened in this. I during beta and during testing for Shadowlands, there was a lot of things. Conduit Energy is just the one that stands out really huge, that players were incredibly vocal about being a negative. This is going to be a negative experience. It's going to be a negative experience. It's going to be a negative experience. And them taking so long to pivot. And I have to caveat this piece of feedback in that in the past 3 months, 4 months, we've seen massive pivots on a lot of things in the game. And the team has clearly learned their lesson. At least they're showing us that they've learned a lesson from the earlier aspect of this expansion. But I have to highlight this fact of, for the majority of this expansion, the first 2 patches really, we sat in a really negative space with a lot of systems because they just were refusing to actually make the changes that were necessary. It wasn't like we have to come up with a solution for the Azurite neck inside BFA kind of thing, where they had to like make up a whole new system for what they were going to replace another system with. Like there was a lot of forgiveness for what they were coming up with there because they were trying to make something up. It was literally like they had to flick a switch to turn off Conduit Energy. Like that ended up being a hotfix they just implemented one day and went, you know what, the graphics not going to update, but you don't have to spend it anymore. And you're like, come on, like you could have done that ages ago. Like, right. So
it was something we told you not to do in beta, and you said, well, we think we're going to do it anyway, and then everybody hated it, and then you changed it months too late. Yeah.
So I like it, that kind of stuff to me is something that had to be highlighted because it was just such a large issue early on in the expansion. Okay, and this third thing for me is, I have to, as much as I said I want to mention story, I have to mention that I disliked another Sylvanas expansion. Regardless of how this actually resolves, which could, change my mind as to how good the story was this expansion, they have hung on to the same issue that Jason and I talked about inside BFA of this is a 2-hour story being told over 2.5 years. And when you leave as much space between chapter 1 and chapter 3, you forget what happened in chapter 1. And the only things that are sticking with me from this expansion because of how bad an MMO is at telling story is the negatives of Sylvanas, because she's the only through line. Everything else is changing. There were great storylines in this expansion, like the finding, what was Tyranda's, what did she become? She was Night Warden, right? Finding the old
Warrior. The Night Warrior.
Right.
Yeah.
Finding all the old Night Warriors and like finding ways to help Tyranda and all that. Like that was all cool. I dug a lot of that stuff. There was a lot of really cool storylines in this expansion, but those don't come to my forefront consistently because they literally went Sylvanas for 4 years and how negative she is. That is just what's stuck in my head. So I wanted more Azeroth. I wanted more storylines that really spoke out about the other primary characters that weren't all rotating around Sylvanas. So for me, story it has to be there because it's going to be the thing that I remember. Like I literally left a raid team that would have gotten me a Hall of Fame Sylvanas title because I just didn't care about having a Sylvanas title. Like I just really I was having such a negative experience with that team, and typically I'd be like, you know what, I'll just stick it out for 3 weeks. I'm going to get the title, and then I'll have the title in my collection. I'll have all the titles. It's the one Hall of Fame title I don't have since Hall of Fame is launched, and I'm fine with it because I really don't want anything to remind me of Sylvanas. So that's okay, Like it's weird. It's such a weird situation. All right, those are my 3, Jason. What do you got?
Okay, number 1 for me is probably not going to be a surprise if you've listened to the show for a long time. It's the fact that there was no analogous system to like artifact power for, gradual power progression, something to do every day, fill up a little bar, get a little bit of currency, get a little bit closer to this next milestone. I know some people really hate that, and that's okay. I think there are ways you can do it that are not, AP was okay in Legion at the outset. It was a little bit it was not very optimized, right? You had to pick a weapon to put it into. You had to pay to start your artifact knowledge every week as soon as you could, as soon as it cooled down and you could start it back up. It was weird. BFA streamlined some of that, but then they made it so punishing because if you didn't have it, you didn't have baseline functionality on your Azerite pieces at the outset of the expansion. And then by the end of the expansion, it didn't matter at all, and you just got way more of it than you ever needed, and it didn't do anything. I think there's a happy medium in there somewhere, and that you can make it a compelling bonus for people that want to do it without it being this restriction for people that don't really care to focus on it. Right, where they're like locked out of essential power. Anima was not an appropriate replacement. Anima was not what the power chasers were looking for. It was a very convoluted and weird currency. It was used for so many different things, and you needed it in concert with other currencies in order to get it to do things that you wanted to do. I think that was a misstep, and I was sitting in the big hall at BlizzCon 2019 going, this is not good.
Yep.
And I feel like, at least for me, I was right up to this point. I think another big miss for me was the legendary crafting system. The legendary system is just a disaster in this expansion.
I was wondering if that was going to be on your list.
Yeah, it's just so bad. I think that, again, there's some lessons here. There's some things that could be salvaged. I think one of your problems is you have way too many legendaries in the pool per spec. A legendary should be a really unique item that you build around and that is like an aspirational thing that you have, right? And I think as such, you probably don't need more than like one legendary per spec. Maybe, 2 to 4 just to give people a little bit of, a little bit of wiggle room to suit your play style. This is AoE, this is single target, this is, whatever. This is 2-target cleave if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty, right? But why have so many legendaries that in many cases are, they're just unattractive. They're clearly underpowered. They're clearly never going to be used in any kind of, competitive or challenging situation. And that's weird to me. I think we should always have legendaries. Like BFA essentially had no legendaries. You get the legendary cloak at the end, but that doesn't really count. That's not really what I'm talking about. That was a vector for the whole corruption system. It wasn't the item itself wasn't like the build around. Legendaries, I'm talking about a thing that you base your build and your playstyle on, essentially, or that amplify it to just a super high level. So I think legendaries need to return in X9. I would like to see a smaller pool of them, and I don't think craftable legendaries were a good idea in practice. Now, maybe it has something to do with the way it was all implemented, right? Because you needed to get the memories, and the memories were scattered to the winds. You need to do all kinds of different content to get all your memories. And memories were, at the outset, were not guaranteed drops.
Yeah, they were a chance. Yep.
Yeah. So, that's not good.
You got a 4-week rotation on world bosses. You didn't get your drop this week. Wait a month and try again.
Yeah, like that's just I don't know how stuff like that makes it out the door. I know that the people who make WoW are passionate WoW nerds. How do any of them think that players aren't going to hate that? So you have that element to it. Now you have your memory, but that's not enough to make your legendary item. Now you need the base piece, and in order to get the base piece, you want to get the highest item level base piece you can get. So you need an obscene amount of materials in order to either skill up your crafting so you can make it for yourself, or someone will have to have burned through an obscene amount of materials to level up their crafting, and then they're going to charge you a premium for that in order to recoup some of the losses that they incurred in being able to make the item. Or maybe you have a buddy who has the craft and you can just supply them with still a fairly large amount of mats to get the item made, right?
The point I would highlight in there is the average cost for actually skilling up to a rank 4 was 500,000 gold. If you think about that in terms of WoW tokens,
right,
you're like 2.5, 3 WoW tokens at least, inside some cases, depending on where the market value is on these things. Sometimes it's 112K for a token, and you're talking about 3+ tokens. Like, you're talking about somewhere between 60 and $80 to be able to get to the point where you actually craft a legendary.
Just to buy enough mats so that you can craft it.
Exactly. So and then you end up with an inventory full of low-level legendaries, which no one really wants to buy.
You can't even vendor. You can't scrap them to get any mats back.
Yeah.
Right. So now we have the memory, which we painstakingly acquired, especially if it was early in the expansion when we didn't have guaranteed drops. And we have the base item, which receives the power of the memory, which we have at great personal cost we have incurred to obtain this item. We still can't make the legendary. We still have 2 items that do nothing yet. Because why? We need to do Torghast specifically to get Soul Ash so that we can infuse all of these things together and make a wearable item that actually gives us the power. And, Torghast is a huge missed opportunity for the game, I'm sad to say. It was a cool idea. I love roguelike games. Slay the Spire is one of my favorite games of all time. I play it all the time still. I love games like Hades or anything like that. Vampire Survivors is a recent one that came out that was really fun, where you have like stuff that you want to have happen, but the outcome is not really predetermined. It's not Super Mario Brothers, right? It's not the same experience every time, and it's only up to your skill that changes the way it plays out. It's like you have to make choices in order to succeed. And sometimes the game is not going to present you with optimal choices, and sometimes you're not going to succeed. And you crap out and you try again and you hope you get better choices and you try to work with the pieces you have. That's the give and take. That's the tension those games create. That was clearly what inspired Torghast. The problem is Torghast needs to be a mode where you succeed because it's part of World of Warcraft. You cannot have a thing in World of Warcraft that is essential for players to acquire currency from that they are not guaranteed to succeed at, right? Like, you made it so we have to do Torghast in order to make legendaries. And in order to participate in high-level endgame content, you need legendaries. Therefore, you must succeed at Torghast. And that was not a guarantee at the outset of the expansion. So all of these things combine to make craftable legendaries go from like one of the coolest on paper ideas you could ever present about a WoW expansion at a BlizzCon to like one of the most terrible implementations of a powerful item that we've ever seen. It's like, it's a super powerful game changing item that you feel terrible about acquiring. Well, and it's a funny magic trick.
It is. It emphasizes to me the feeling that I have often when systems are being put into WoW of like a bill going to Congress or going to Parliament or whatever it is whatever governing system you use, where everyone has to tack their idea onto it along the way, so that by the time it gets there, it doesn't look anything like the initial idea. I feel like that happened with Legendaries, where like Torghast wasn't involved in Legendaries at all, and somewhere along the way, someone's like, "Well, we have this Torghast thing that's really cool. How do we really make it super relevant to the game? Well, let's just put a resource in it that's required for Legendaries." And you're like, smack, and that just goes in there, as opposed to like, okay, let's think about this resource thing. Maybe it should come from callings, and it should come from all of these other activities that end of Mythic Plus dungeon. How about you get some resource from that too, right? Like that, if they actually designed the resource around the Legendaries in a well thought out process, it feels like it would have been implemented very differently than, okay, we need something that makes this feel like it fits, so just smack this requirement on. Oh, we need something else, smack that requirement on. Oh, professions need to feel like you're really accomplishing something, so let's make this really quite the big grind kind of process, and we'll just add that, and suddenly the Legendaries go out the door, and you're like, it doesn't look like anything like it initially started as is this cool thing at BlizzCon that we're all hyped about, right? So that's what that system felt like to me too.
Yeah, it's just to even explain it to somebody, you sound like you're rambling, right? Like it's a very bizarre implementation, and I don't know. It's even now the Legendary system is such a mess that like I have people who've played more or less the entire expansion, right? Have mostly logged in and rated and stuff, and we have people who cycle in and out as content kind of ebbs and flows as many people do, but have played pretty consistently, at least for up through AOTC and some farm, every tier. And like, they do not understand how to get a rank 7 legendary. They don't understand like what is involved in that or what that means or how to do that. And it's like, how have we failed so fundamentally at making these cool signature items such a chore and a hassle and feel just so bad? So that's my number 2 thing. I mean, that encompasses a lot of what's really wrong with Shadowlands. I think like when we talk through it all the way, and like the way it ties into these other loot reward systems and Torghast and all these other things, it's like, yeah, this is kind of the through line that up until I think as of Thursday this week, we're finally in a good place with Legendaries. Well, that's how long it took. Was the hotfix that went in Thursday.
Yeah, well, let's emphasize the comparable point, okay? Because this is the thing. Legion, legendary items just dropped. You didn't earn them or craft them, or you'd be doing content and you'd loot a legendary. And that'd be it. You now have the legendary. And you just loot another one. And then you just loot another one. And they had their own issues.
Anywhere.
Anywhere. And they had their own issues with drop rates and, all that kind of stuff, which towards the end of the expansion, eventually they had a vendor where you could go out and get legendaries from, which I think I struggled to figure out why that wasn't just a solution they carried forward. But it is something where the comparable between like, okay, let's make a crafting system that costs hundreds of thousands of gold and a huge amount of time investment to be able to make one legendary versus let's just have legendaries appear when you kill a random antelope in the wild and you just like rip out legendary out of its guts. Like what, like
I used to get legendaries out of the random treasure chests in Legion all the time because I would just do everything there was to do every day, every week out in the world on my character. And it was all streak protection. So you just have all these events just line up and eventually, the coin flips your way.
Yeah.
Again, happy medium somewhere. We can have a little bit more direction in the legendary system and still have like an opportunity for spiky moments, but have it not be as grindy, something.
Now
the other, the other thing on my list that I think is like the biggest miss and this is another thing that really alienated players. I feel like, and another thing that I feel like they've done better in this patch than in the previous 2 seasons is under the Covenant's umbrella, right? So there is nuance. Nuance exists in our world, that exists in WoW. Things are not all good and all bad. The Covenants gave us renown, which is very good. Covenants also gave us conduits, which are very, very bad. So I think conduits are a perfect example of how not to do kind of gradual power progression and let's sort of like a secondary talent system, or add some kind of player choice, to kind of round out a spec, because this is the thing they've been so cagey with, right? Like we talked about conduit energy already.
Yeah.
Conduit energy was a disaster. Everybody told them not to do it, pleaded with them not to do it. It wasn't in alpha. I played builds of Shadowlands that did not have conduit energy. And then they put it in. They went, we want to see how it goes. And everybody went, this sucks. We don't like this. We need to be able to swap conduits because I am a druid and I have 4 different specs and I want to raid and do PvP. And they went, well, we think that, with 10 conduit energy and, you recharge 1 a day, it should be okay. And what it turned into was like, you either didn't think about conduit energy at all, because once you got your conduits, you set them up and then you never changed anything, or you did have different play styles and you were constantly hamstrung by conduit energy. Now, that's a huge problem with the system, but that's only a small part of the total problem that I have with it, because that's just socketing and moving around conduits you already have. Acquiring conduits has been a complete mess. Powering them up to item level relevance that's side by side with your gear has been a complete headache and nightmare. And it's everything that's bad about items, right? And item acquisition. It's the stuff we don't like about item acquisition, without really the cool stuff about item acquisition, which is you get a new transmog, you get some cool new look, you get some cool new effect. Your character like palpably plays differently because your stats have increased, whatever, you hit a haste or a crit threshold or something. So it's the drop chance and randomness of items in some cases when it comes to stuff that drops from particular sources, or at least it did. Again, this is better now, but it's been a year and a half of this. You have that element of randomness, and the acquisition doesn't feel as good. And then it's also, it has been up through seasons 1 and 2, also all the worst parts of a gradual power progression system without feeling like you're getting anywhere. Because if you did the 226 conduit grind in season 1, which I did, and the 252 conduit grind in season 2, which I did, that was a lot of kind of thankless work, chores that I felt like I was doing. It's like, I want this whole thing filled out with the highest number that it goes to. That's what I want. You put the item level in there. You gave me a way to do it. I'm going to do it. And that means I'm going to fight against the Eye of the Jailer every single day for months on end. And I'm going to try to optimize that and max that out. And then it means I'm going to go to Korthia and I'm going to try to do everything I can do in Korthia the Maw every single day to get as much research as I possibly can, so that I can buy a random conduit upgrade. I can't even get the ones I'm using upgraded so I can move on with my life, right? Like, it just, I don't understand who they thought that these types of decisions were appealing to. I like the fact that in this patch you can just do like Mythic Plus dungeons and get 265s from 15s, and particular conduits drop from particular dungeons, and you can power them up, and then you're done with that. There's no outdoor grind to get currency to hopefully power up the few that you're using, right? The problem with that is that apparently conduits are like inaccessible from PvP. There's like no reliable way to get PvP up from PvP to get conduit upgrades. The conduit system should never be revisited in any way. Other than the UI is cool, right? Like, it does look cool, and I think there is maybe something to be said for like having some of the bonuses that you could swap, because you have that, like, you could do that idea in many different kind of role playing environments. Like in this case, we're pledged to this covenant, and you have this soulbind, and your agreement with this entity, you're sharing your powers, you're combining your souls, and so you take on the traits of this other character. Like, you could do something similar to that in other contexts, and have like a cool system to throw in some different bonuses that you can swap between. But the way it's been presented with the conduits and like, okay, you really want these bonuses because this really actually fleshes out your specs kit. Like you need this like cooldown reduction one, and you need this thing that powers up your Covenant active ability, and you should have these. It just doesn't. Nothing about it has felt good this entire time. And I think putting item level on it was also a mistake. Like maybe, I had the thought that this would have been a perfect use case for anima, right? Like you should be able to unlock all of your conduits with anima. You should be able to power them up with anima, and then like don't put item level on the conduits. Use anima to power them up through different ranks. Maybe have them stop at like rank 4 or 5. That way you're kind of setting a cap on the power bonus that players can get from their conduits without tying it directly to item level, because that means something in my brain as a WoW player. And if I'm playing at this level of content, then I want everything that I'm using to reflect about this item level range, right? If I'm killing a boss and the boss drops a 226 item, I don't want to have a 200 conduit that I'm using. I want to have a 226 conduit. So I don't even think that like the system is completely unsalvageable in those terms. Like there's always opportunities to add power to chase and ways that we could spec out our characters. But when you have this combination of like a loot drop system, there's some randomness to the loot acquisition, whether it's a world quest rolling up or the boss actually dropping a thing you want. And then the thing to power it up, you need to do a lot of just drudge work out in the world over and over again every day for months. And then maybe you get like all of the stuff you want. You end up with a lot of upgraded conduits that you're never going to use. It's just yeah. I don't want to see these things carry forward 1-to-1. That it's such a misfire, because I know so many people who were turned off by it, just felt terrible that they couldn't get what they wanted out of the system. Yeah.
So the silver lining aspect to all this actually starts on conduits. It's a great way to spin off from this. That I want to end on a good note is the amount of change that's happened over the span of this expansion, and how good of a place we've moved into and are continuing to grow in this current patch. And conduits is a great example, because the current way to acquire conduits is they just randomly drop from, well, they don't randomly, they actually guaranteed drops from raids and Mythic Plus, as well as you can buy them off PvP vendor. So if you're someone who's running a 15 dungeon and you complete the 15, you will get 265 conduits off the end of that dungeon run. They'll drop for you. You can look inside the dungeon loot table. They will be there in the loot table, that it's clear that you can get them. You just run the dungeon, kill the bosses, loot the chest. And that's one of the reasons why right now, if you're running Mythic Plus, in the end of dungeon, you have that like loot pop-up that happens in the middle of your screen. It's like 3 or 4 pages long, because it's everyone receiving conduits before they receive their loot, which is always interesting to see. So much better acquisition systems for that. Same thing with raid. We're killing raid bosses. We're getting 278 conduits. That's cool. This feels much better than, as Jason described, going out and trying to like track them down out in the open world with a small chance to have something happen, or trying to track them down inside specific dungeons and it's a chance that it happens to drop. Just having the guaranteed, here's 3 conduits, is a system that should have been there in the first place. The only thing I would, if there's devs listening, I would push forward is that it'd be nice if there was a random chance to get a conduit associated with your PvP rating at the end of completing a PvP task. If that's 2s, 3s, rated battlegrounds, whatever it is, and you're doing 1500s or whatever, and you get a 239 conduit because you don't have that conduit yet, randomly at the end of it, cool, good, add that into the game, because I know a lot of PvPers who are suffering right now with, how do I get conduits? What do I do with, I have to run Mythic Plus to get conduits? I don't want to do that. That happens a lot in the conversations. There's 2 things I've learned about PvPers in the past, and people can write in, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but of the groups that I've been playing with, they all don't have a lot of gold, is one of the first thing, because they don't really do a lot of activity outside of PvP that earn them any gold. Conduits are, and how to get legendaries and whatnot is a complete mystery, and they have no idea how to solve it. And they all need help with those things. So those are the most frequent questions I get when I'm with the group is, how do you get a 291 legendary? What is this thing? And then also conduits, and where are conduits from? And I don't want to do that. So also, like, anything that involves world questing, they're also very opposed to, which surprised me. But I feel like that's just a specific group. I don't feel like that's everybody. I think a lot of people are PvP and they still do that stuff. But yeah, so I just want to emphasize that we've moved into a I would almost say new stage. I heard someone the other day be like, did Ian get fired? Like, did someone else take over? Like, what's happening? Because it's just such a big monumental shift in the direction of development and how they're treating changes to the game, that I think it's really, really representative of a completely different mindset towards the content. So we're in a good spot. We're going to be moving forward with exciting changes. It sounds like everyone, we're asking for things and they're being delivered. So if that just continues moving forward, then great. They've clearly learned their lessons from the negative things that we've talked about. And hopefully next expansion, we see even more improvements on these types of things.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I mean, I think you and I are kind of in the same boat when it comes to the trajectory we've been on the last 5 odd months here. I mean, you'll notice most of my complaints about, this little expansion recap we're doing here 2/3 of the way through in terms of content, at least, is it kind of feels like ancient history at the moment because it's so de-emphasized in 9.2. So that's a good thing. There's stuff that they flexed on this expansion that, who saw it coming? They stuck to their guns on some of this stuff for a long time through alpha and beta. They said they weren't going to change it. They launched with it. They let it go out there for an entire year before they rolled some of it back. And now we're seeing the cross-faction instances barrier fall coming up in 9.2.5, which is on PTR, which means it can't be that far away in real terms. Like, that stuff would have been unthinkable even 2 years ago. So I do think they're moving in a good direction. I think changes were necessary. I think they were beholden to a lot of older school philosophies that really weren't working for the game and the players anymore, and they were alienating players as a result. I think if you've been engaged with the game throughout this expansion, you probably have seen this momentum and felt this swing. But if you checked out, I don't think there's been enough to really bring you back in. But hopefully these are all lessons learned for X9.
Yeah. All right, last right in here. This comes from Adam and WoW. Who says, to answer your question, our question that we asked Adam, overall, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm having a pretty good time so far. Raid looks pretty good. Some nice encounters, and it seems overall good balanced. So I guess the content that you're facing is fairly balanced. Wasn't for us at the very beginning, but cool. Glad you're enjoying it. Mythic Plus is feeling better and better since they adjusted a bunch of stuff to the affix and some dungeons, though there's still room to do more. Double legendary and tier changed some things, so it's a fresh playstyle. My gold making adventure was pretty successful to the point where I decided to retire or at least take a break for now. Personally, I wouldn't mind to have a larger daily loop and some grindable player power like conduits and sockets in 9.0 and 9.1, but I get that a lot of players didn't like the Maw or Korthia grind, so I get why they want to try something new. I feel you on the daily grind, although right now mentally with what's going on in real life for me, with my job and a bunch of stuff that's turning over at my job, I am enjoying that I can log in and do 25 minutes of world questing and then spend the rest of my time maxing out my vault. When my vault's totally maxed out, I then have this like huge different mentality relief of pressure where I'm like, I just have to do 30 minutes. And then I can focus on all this real life stuff that's really driving me insane at the moment and try and fix all that and put out a 2-hour long Patron episode and not worry about I have to get back in and do these other things because there's all this stuff I have to do. So I am enjoying that right now, although I know Spencer from a year and a half ago or 2 years ago would be dying for something to grind at the moment. So I feel you on that one. I'm glad your gold making paid off. I know you talked about it a bit inside of the Discord channel, so that's pretty exciting. For those who don't know, Adam was one of the people who put a lot of time into professions and getting the profession stuff going so that they could actually have the reputation in advance to craft a bunch of these Lego things and make a bunch of gold, which they did, which was great. So that's awesome. But let's get to your question. Your question is, how do we feel about the race to World First, and the complaints about the length of it? Personally, I don't have an issue with the fact that it takes more than 2 weeks to kill the final boss of a raid tier. The event around the race is something the guilds decide to do, and I think Blizzard is not supposed to balance the game around these issues. I am also not a big fan of the split runs advertising and gold dumping into the race, and I think it's one of the reasons we don't have Master Loot. Okay, so the Race to World First has always been a fairly contentious topic for me, mainly because...
First of all, Adam,
okay,
and
sure.
how are you going to ask a question that just states my opinion? What am I supposed to say?
All right, fair. We'll get to Jason rereading Adam's response in a moment. Yeah, it's always been kind of a contentious thing for me because I've really felt like the PTR testing that happens on the raid really sort of gives teams so much time to practice killing the bosses already that by the time it goes live, it's not really a race. It's like a race where when you arrive from like leg 1 to leg 2, you get to skip to leg 7 because you've basically already killed all those bosses already, and there's not enough really new things to have to progress a lot on them. Or at least you already know exactly what the course is to actually go that direction. And that's really sold big time by a lot of the teams muting all of their conversations and Discord stuff during their testing so that they can make all of their plans around all the things they're going to exploit and take advantage of in class stack towards ensuring the boss dies really quickly. So I have always been kind of like hesitant around how much I supported the race, because when I was really pushing content back in the day, it was during Burning Crusade, when I was racing for stuff like this, where we had zero idea of what a boss did until we arrived on. There weren't kill videos. There wasn't like big log breakdowns. There wasn't a PTR testing phase that happened. There wasn't anything like that. It was just, here's a raid with a bunch of bosses in it. Go figure out how to do it. And that to me was really interesting. And there was no dungeon journal or anything like that. So, the current race, I actually supported a lot more, because there were the last 3 bosses, no one got a chance to see. There was nothing. There was even actually talk of, hey, maybe there's no dungeon journal for those last 3 bosses until, X period of time has passed after the content's been released. That didn't happen. The dungeon journal came out immediately, but it was something that at least they could read about the mechanics, but not actually see them and see the overlaps and the timings and those sorts of things. So there was a lot more learning that happened. Like you, I'm also totally comfortable with the race taking longer than 2 weeks. I've always felt it was a little bit extreme that these teams were able to actually completely clear a mythic raid in a 2-week period of time, or like a 8-day period of time in some cases. It always felt very extreme as far as the fact that it's possible to do. Like it made gear feel very irrelevant, and it made a lot of teams, especially in the mythic position rating where I am, go, well, I mean, our item level is similar to their item level, so we don't need more gear. We should just keep extending and just push to try and kill as fast as we can, because those teams are able to do it, so we should be able to do it too, which is true. It might take more polls than it took them for the learning process for everyone, but clearly it is actually possible to accomplish, right? Because the numbers are there. And a lot of the time when these teams are going up against these bosses, there's people in the background crunching the numbers going, does the X amount of damage that we can put out equate to the boss health over the berserk timer of this boss, right? Like, is it actually possible for us to do enough damage to kill the boss? And if it is, then they keep going. If it isn't, then they discuss what margin that is and how they could change that number. But it's always been something to me that's bothered me a little bit. I'm fine with the race taking longer than 2 weeks. That doesn't bother me in the least. I will say that I feel for the players. Knowing a lot of the people in the World First race, I wouldn't say a lot. I know 8 people in the World First. They all of them very much have the opinion of, I want to push this content very aggressively, and I want to be done with this push in that 2-week period of time. That's the max they really want to do it. They take time off work or outside of their lives, away from family events, whatever it is, to focus on this one thing for really crazy amounts of time for a 2-week period, and they find that really enjoyable. The moment it starts eking towards that 14 days or beyond, suddenly this becomes I really dislike this decision that I made to do this thing. It's something I'm doing, and I'm going to feel better once we've accomplished it, but I'm no longer in this is a lot of fun stage for a lot of the people who I talk to. And that that to me, I feel for them on. But again, as you said, it's not a Blizzard sponsored, supported thing. It's something the players choose to do and decide to do. The gold issue you bring up is a whole other factor. And I know I know only reason I'm sort of expanding longer and longer and not letting Jason speak in about each of these individual things is he already expressed that his whole thought is basically the same thing you expressed. So I'm sure he'll reiterate or expand more after. But the gold dumping is insane this time around. Split runs that are happening where literally the raid teams saw and acknowledged that there's only a specific number of players in the pool of people out there who can funnel gear to you, right? There's only a certain number of players out there who are like, yeah, I would jump into a raid and trade this person from Liquid or Echo or whoever a piece of loot. That's something I would put time into doing. You know, I'm going to raid normal this week and then try and trade them normal loot next week. That's what I want to do. And so they started like literally just saying, hey, if you show up, we'll give you gold. So you're literally buying people with gold into your group. Which then takes it away from other teams, right? There's so many split runs happening. Like teams are doing like 12 to 15 split runs at least. You then have so many people that you need that they're trying to buy them away from other teams to try and make sure that their team has the best people and opportunities to do these things, right? It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And they're paying 8 million gold for trading shoulders or whatever it is, right? You're like, okay, like, talking financials here, like 8 million gold is like $1,000. Like they're paying someone like $1,000 in WoW tokens to trade them one piece of gear. Like it's astronomically surprising. And I want to emphasize that teams like Liquid and whatnot have openly expressed that they don't dump real money into the gold market to do this. They don't buy a whole bunch of tokens up or something like that to do this. The gold that they have is gold that they accumulate or borrow throughout that period of time. And then they always pay back, obviously, to the teams they end up borrowing from. But that's how they accumulate their gold pile. So these teams aren't necessarily doing some weird buying a ton of tokens kind of transaction. Some might be. I just know that in a lot of situations, it isn't that situation. But overall, to me, it's gross to see. Like it's an unattractive thing to see the split runs. I don't think it's enjoyable at all for the players or anyone like that. It's unattractive. The amount of gold stuff that's happening feels really... it just feels gross to me. It just feels really. I'm not a fan. And I do agree with your last point of. I think one of the reasons that we don't have master loot is because of the race and what happened with the race. I think there is still that underlying issue of the random Joe Blow player who doesn't want to socially interact with people. Getting a ton of pressure to trade away a piece of loot they got to somebody else, or not getting loot in a run that they joined and felt they earned loot in because Master Looter got turned on. And that's why they sort of chose to do the personal loot system. I just feel like having the option to have Master Loot back just makes sense. So let's give the option to guild groups or pre-made groups or whatever it is. And when people are joining groups and they see Master Loot is on, then they can discuss loot rules ahead of time, or they can, choose not to join that group, whatever it is. That could be a barrier for them if they have bad experiences. Who knows? All right, Jason, I'll unleash your repetition of this.
Yeah, sure. I do not like the Race of the World First, especially as in its current, state, as we've noticed since the beginning of BFA now. If you remember, it wasn't until Old Deer that like it was a live streamed event.
Yeah.
It was kind of taboo. Teams would keep their strats kind of close to the vest. Sometimes, like way back in the day, kill videos wouldn't come out for weeks. Somebody would be frapsing a kill or whatever. That's how we used to capture videos of WoW gameplay. And a guild would sit on it until like the next guild killed it before they would release their kill video. Now it's a big media event. It's a lot of eyeballs on World of Warcraft. The WoW social media teams and stuff pump it up. It's not an official WoW event. Blizzard doesn't do anything with it, but they do a little bit of graphic design. They'll throw some stuff up on socials and draw attention to it. And it's just weird. I don't think it's good for the game. I don't think it's good for public perception of the game because it isn't the game. It's like I like basketball, right? Like I watch the NBA. I watch NBA games. You know what I don't want to watch is like the Harlem Globetrotters. Like I wouldn't want to watch that all the time or whatever. I mean, that's an exhibition. It doesn't represent like the way the sport of basketball is played. Right? The Race to World First does not really represent the way that World of Warcraft is played as a cooperative PvE activity. So I think people pay attention to it and they learn weird lessons from it. You know, you see people want to incorporate what World First racers are doing in their own raids, and it's like, this is not probably the direction you need to or should be going in. You know, you need to take a step outside of, like, you need to understand that, like, this isn't the blueprint for defeating the boss. This is the blueprint for defeating the boss in an environment where you have no options and no gear, right, and, you know, very limited experience and polls and information
and infinite classes to pull from. You can have nine priests if you want.
Right. You know, I think the time frame thing, I think it's great. I love the fact that this one is not done yet, and we might be coming up on another reset. We'll see how long Jailer ends up living. I remember back, what was it, the Jaina race, right? It was coming up on like that second week, and man, you know, I think at the time it was Limit, and it was still old method, right? We're both doing live stream events, and they were getting pissy because their studios or arenas or whatever they were broadcasting from, their contracts were running out, and Jaina wasn't dead, and they were essentially like demanding that Jaina be nerfed so it could be killed in this 2-week window, and it's just like, this is not representative of anything that makes any kind of sense. Well, if the boss isn't dead, it's not dead. It's not Blizzard's fault that you didn't kill it yet. Like, go get some more gear.
Like, the funny thing about the current race situation is that's happened, where their hotel for Liquid has actually run out. They cannot. They've extended their hotel 3 times so far. They've actually extended their stay 3 times so far, and they've now hit the point where they can't extend farther because the room's already booked for something else. And so they actually had to switch hotels the other day. Everyone brought all their stuff to the arena they're playing in, and then went to a new hotel that evening. And actually, the cheapest way apparently to travel that many people was by like limo Hummer. Like, it was like a giant stretch, because it was like they couldn't rent a bus because the buses were there was some weird thing. Like, it was bizarre situation that they ran into. But yeah, so they are running into that situation currently. The Jaina thing, you brought that up, and it just touches a nerve every time, because at the time, Limit was doing a Jaina strat because a certain way, because they felt that basically there was an ad that they felt you were supposed to kill before DPSing Jaina the boss, and Method at the time decided, you know what, we're just not going to do this. We're going to ignore this ad's mechanic that you're supposed to do and just try and brute force the boss, and ended up killing Jaina with it just ignoring that mechanic, even though the intention was that you were supposed to do it. And Blizzard admitted the intention was you're supposed to do it, but then they couldn't change it because now the boss has been killed, and that's even happened this race already with Anduin. There was a similar situation that happened with Anduin this past week. So you got to be really careful with stuff like that. And I think Blizzard was just really careful with stuff like that this time around. I mean, it still happened on Anduin where they hotfixed something, and the hotfix was not the intended hotfix, and the boss died before the hotfix got reversed, which meant that they now can't reverse it because a team's killed it and progressed forward, which is frustrating. So, it's something they have to be really careful with changing that. But I'm with you. I think if it takes 3 weeks because they need to get the loot, then it takes 3 weeks because they need to get the loot. That's just, I'm shocked they're able to kill things that they're able to kill right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is just this bizarre exhibition, and you know, these bosses aren't designed to be killed this fast by almost anyone alive. And the game certainly doesn't support that either. And, you know, part of it now, like the gear funneling, I think, was so bad, and the splits were so bad this time around. And it really just goes to show that Blizzard needs to do something about this. Because
first week, 4-piece, of content, 4-piece on like majority of the raiders. Crazy.
And
crazy.
Who suffers as a result of this? Is it the world first racers that you're ostensibly punishing with your loot distribution rules? No. Because they just build their base broader and broader and broader. They like you said, they like essentially buy out other teams to be able to, you know, funnel them eligible loot. They request, you know, they basically pay bounties for like somebody who can trade pieces of loot or whatever. Meanwhile, your average friends and family raid team gets essentially useless gear over and over. It's so much wasted gear, especially with the rules around tokens, where you have to have a set piece of equivalent item level equipped, and before you can trade it, when you get 2 drops to be able to trade it, and like these are things that players should be empowered to decide what the correct distribution is for them. And I know that Master Loot is controversial to some people, but my point is, I don't have an option anymore. You can have your personal loot if you want it, but I need Master Loot back. And I don't think I think the longer this goes on, my point just gets illustrated better and better by the behavior of the World First Race. Like, it has gotten so bad. It's gotten so much worse than it used to be when they were like, well, we'll show them, we'll put in personal loot only, and then they won't be able to run splits to funnel gear. Like, that did the opposite of what you thought it was going to do.
Yeah, it just got more degenerate. Yeah.
Yeah, it just needs to change, is really the bottom line. You need to at least give people the option to decide where the boss's loot goes. If you don't like where your group decides that the loot goes, then don't play with that group.
Yeah.
That's the way, it's just reality. So yeah, overall, I think it just keeps getting worse. It's getting worse and worse. It's making the game look worse all the time in my mind. Like, it's the most eyeballs the game ever has on it outside of like a release. Like when an expansion comes out, then obviously there's a ton of eyeballs on the game. When Wrath of the Lich King Classic inevitably comes out in 23 or whenever that's going to be, that's going to be a huge thing on social, on Twitch, everywhere. It's going to be a lot of eyeballs. And then, so outside of those big drops, it's only the World First races where it really gets any attention. Esports don't really they get a fraction of what the World First race gets in terms of, Twitch attention and just overall discussion. And it's like, the stakes get higher and higher. Now you got liquid money involved in the race to World First, right? Like one of the biggest, longest running, most successful esports orgs that has ever existed now has a vested interest in making sure that their guys win the race to World First, right? And so the lengths that they're able to go to far exceed what any other players can. And then Blizzard's in this constant arms race to make their lives harder. I think it results in fights not being as good encounters as they could be, because sometimes there's no way it doesn't creep into encounter designers' minds. How could it not? They're human beings. How could you not be designing like a late in the instance encounter and you're thinking, let's see how Limit/Liquid deals with this one, right? Yeah. Like that has to occur to the designers, and I don't mean that as a slight against them, because how could it not, right? Like I think it's just like a human. Like, they're trying to kill your bosses in ways that you didn't intend or want them to, or in a timeline that is not really like even conceivable. So yeah, I'm sure the designers get a little chuckle out of trying to throw in a twist that's going to screw up the racers. But then, does that make a better fight for everybody for the duration of that race lifespan? Like, I don't think so. I just don't think like the media attention that the race generates for the game is ultimately worth the effects that this behavior has on the everyday player. And I mean, I didn't think that was the case years ago when it wasn't even the big media event that it is now. And the more esports money comes into the space, the more attention it gets. I think it just keeps getting worse and worse. So, I want Blizzard to make a cool and good and fun game. And if that means that the race to World First is a month long or 3 days long, I really don't care, because what I care about is the experiences that I'm having with the people that I'm playing with. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be like a downer or anything. I don't expect that the race to World First is going anywhere. I'm sure we'll have another one as soon as another tier releases that'll be even bigger stakes than this one was.
Oh, I'm waiting for that triple race, man. That triple race.
Yeah.
Who can kill all of the bosses in all of the raids first?
Right. Yeah, exactly. The season 4 role, that's not going to be a thing, but like still, Liquid wants to get their brand out there. I'm sure they'll be able to find corporate sponsors to do another event when that stuff comes out. It's like, that's just what it's turned into. And, designing the game in parallel with trying to hamstring that whole process somehow or something, or just like design, even subconsciously having that in mind when you're designing the game. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it has personally made my experience with WoW worse because of the effects that it has on the game broadly. I'm just really not a fan. So I've paid basically no attention to this race other than like the Wowhead bot in my Discord for my guild, posting stuff that I don't read, but I don't ignore the headlines. It's like, I'm not watching anything. I'm not paying any attention to it. I could not care less about it as a concept, to be honest. And I feel like it has made WoW worse for me.
Yeah, I would just want there to be a Blizzard sponsored based race. I feel like the unregulated race is part of the issue around it. Setting guidelines, setting rules. Like if Blizzard actually went, hey, we're gonna actually pull the reins on this thing and go, hey, you know what? No funneling, and we're just gonna make that a rule. We're not gonna tell people, hey, we are gonna put systems in the game to try and hamper this. We're gonna take away Master Looter to try and hamper this, but we're gonna run an event. This event's gonna have rules and guidelines, and we're going to make it really clear what these rules and guidelines are. And if one of them was you can't run splits, you can only have a roster of X many people, you can only have X many characters involved, you can only have like each person can have 2 characters or 3 characters, like whatever it is they want to do, that I think would make this much more interesting to watch than them trying to adjust content to then hamper the race in some way or change the outcome of the race or do something with the race. I'd much rather them go, you know what, we're going to own this as far as an event goes. And if you guys are going to go off and do your own thing, that's fine. But the Blizzard Warcraft sponsored machine is going to be pushing this particular thing. Teams can apply. They can do whatever it is they want to do to actually get into this and have their own rules and guidelines. And they can stop screwing with content to try and make it happen. They can just go, yeah, you know what? The race that we're running can only have 3 characters. So each person can only have 3 characters. You can only have a roster of 25 people. So you can only have 25 people. Like that to me suddenly is like, okay, we're actually not going to try to discourage splits by making some, obscure loot system or something. We're going to just tell people you're not doing, like, you only have 3 characters. You can't bring in outside characters. You can't do that.
Right.
Like that's just part of the rules.
I think Blizzard has been smart over the years to not make it an official event, but I think they have to. Lately, the last few years, they've been really happy to kind of, keep one foot in each realm. Yep. And I think they need to either commit to supporting it or ignore its existence in terms of how they design the game, its raids, and its systems.
Agreed.
I think if they were going to get involved, the thing to do would be to run it as a sort of like a promotional piece for an upcoming patch, do it on tournament realms, and let people just make template tunes, right? Like let Liquid get in there and kit out their squad however they want it. There's no drops. You're not affecting the live game in any way. You do it on closed realms 2 weeks before the patch comes out, and you just say go. And you can show off the bosses and show off, whatever elements of the items and stuff that you can obtain from the raid. You can actually use the promotional power of the race idea to your advantage in that regard without having these huge knock-on effects for people who just log into live servers and play the game. I'm not predicting that they're going to do this. I'm not saying this is ever going to happen. And in fact, if anything, I think the complete opposite will happen, and that they will just, continue to try to skim off the top of the attention it creates without, supporting the event itself. I think they should ignore the event, but at this point, I think it would be better for them to run an exhibition tournament race to promote a patch release and a raid release than to just keep doing what they're doing, which is sort of a wink and a nudge trying to quote unquote punish the racers by making the top end bosses obscure and obscenely difficult to the point where only 2 or 3 or 5 guilds in the world will kill a boss in its state, before it gets significant nerfs. The whole thing about loot distribution and all that, I feel like they're their refusal to commit to one path or the other is creating even more problems around the event.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up this monster of an episode. Thank you very much to all of our patrons for supporting and encouraging us to do these sorts of things. It's always nice to do. Thanks very much for Corsair for popping on. It's always great to chat live with our patrons, but also for all those people who submitted questions. I mean, we clearly had a lot to say, so we really appreciate that. All right, that wraps up episode 511 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can go over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter or join our Discord at thestartingzone.com/Discord. Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me is always over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. I was talking WoW and whatever else I'm getting into, and there's a lot of WoW stuff to talk about lately. It's been a very busy couple of weeks, so yeah, check me out over there. Come say hi.
Great. Trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey or over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD. And with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening and jobs done. Hi everyone, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. Today I'm giving a special shout out to Arajian, Celian, Greg, Kapawi, Nibble the Mighty, and Shorel. Thank you. This sounder is for you.